Splatoon has been around for almost 10 years, and since its beginnings, we've gotten several weapons across 11 different weapon classes. Everyone has those weapons that they love, but also weapons that they hate. Now that can vary, of course. Some casual players may have hatred towards a specific set of weapons, and some competitive players may have a hatred towards a different set of weapons. But honestly, this weapon that I'm about to mention is arguably hated by all types of players, casuals and competitive included. And that's the Tri-Slosher. As someone who primarily plays only Sloshers, which includes the Tri-Slosher, I've heard all the insults before. This weapon is public enemy number 1, being constantly labeled as skillless and brain dead. In a nutshell, no skill, no aim, must be a Tri-Slosher main. But it wasn't always like this. How did this little blue and square bucket become one of the most hated weapons in the franchise? Well, we need to go back in time when it was actually a little green bucket where we saw its rise to infamy. During Splatoon 1, Tri-Slosher wasn't hated for the most part because it largely stayed irrelevant for the 2 years that Splatoon 1 was alive. No one really cared that it existed. Tri was first introduced in Splatoon 1's first big update. Its first kit was Disruptor and Bubbler, which if you know anything about Splatoon 1 meta, hearing Disruptor and Bubbler in the same sentence probably might give you nightmares, but I'll explain why it isn't the case for Tri shortly. A few months later, we saw Tri-Slosher Nouveau come to the game with Seeker and Echo Locator. If you're unfamiliar with Splatoon 1, it was incredibly chaotic to the point where a lot of people felt this game was incredibly broken. It's largely remembered for its 2 distinctive metas. The first meta was a damage up meta, which was named after the ability Damage Up. This ability increased the damage of your main, sub, and special weapon by 30%. So when you look at Tri-Slosher's kits, you might see why it was irrelevant during this meta. Both kits have one part of their kit that did no damage, therefore did not benefit from damage up. Disruptor and Bubbler caused no damage, and for the Nouveau's kit, Echo Locator also caused no damage. But this is the simple explanation. It also becomes more complicated with how damage up multipliers worked. The whole purpose of running damage up was that you could improve your chances of one-shotting people. That's the reason why weapons like E-Liter ran a lot of damage up to be able to one-shot an enemy with only 65% of their charge. In Tri-Slosher's case, there was basically a damage up cap, where even if you added a lot of damage up, Tri-Slosher would still need 2 shots to take out the enemy. It also doesn't help that the damage up multipliers become more difficult and confusing when defense up was also in the game to directly counter damage up, since it decreased the damage from weapons by 30%. And in Splatoon 1, you were not able to see the abilities on the minimap like in Splatoon 2 and Splatoon 3, so you'd sometimes go into a match not knowing how much damage up or defense up the enemy was running, basically making it very hard for a Tri-Slosher to thrive in this meta. It also didn't help that another weapon that is largely compared to the Tri-Slosher was better in Splatoon 1. Luna Blaster Neo was one of the most popular weapons at the beginning of this meta. It had a larger radius, which is relatively similar to Clash Blaster of today. It did higher damage than Tri, and it was one of those weapons that didn't really need damage up to perform well during this meta. If it did use damage up, it at least had a kit that benefited from the increased damage, unlike the Tri-Slosher. There was just not a lot of things going for Tri at the time. But once we got past this meta, Splatoon 1 arrived at a quick respawn and invincibility meta where Bubbler and Kraken were basically at the top of the food chain. So when you have a Kraken, a special that is able to instantly turn you into this invincible and fast moving special for 5 seconds, you're gonna want to have your own invincibility special with Bubbler to protect you. Bubbler was that special that you could instantly pop and it'll protect you from any damage for 4.5 seconds. So you might think, oh, so this is where the Tri-Slosher hate started because it had Bubbler in this game and it was meta in Splatoon 1. That must make sense. Well, no one wanted to play Tri. Instead, they wanted to play the faster and stronger weapon, Zinc Mini Splatling, which also had the same sub and special. That's why I say Tri-Slosher was basically irrelevant for 2 years. 2 metas where the primary build did not support Tri's kit, or there was just a clearly better option to run at the time. But now we move to Splatoon 2, and oh, this is where it gets good. But before we get to Splatoon 2, I'd really appreciate if you check if you are subscribed to the channel. Me and my editor Delta put in a lot of time to make these videos, and if you're enjoying them, it honestly goes a long way in supporting the work that we do. I sometimes get feedback that people are watching the channel but miss new videos because they aren't subscribed, so I would just triple check if you are. If you enjoy the content and don't want to subscribe, that's fine too, but I just wanted to bring it up because it does help my team do the work that we want to bring y'all quality content. Anyways, let's talk about Splatoon 2. In this game, Tri-Slosher debuted with Burst Bomb and Ink Armor. And oh my god, this weapon just ruined the experience for a lot of players at the start of Splatoon 2. There are a couple of things that made Tri the monster it was initially. There were very few weapons at the start of Splatoon 2. During that time, there were about 40 weapons available to players. Number 2, the weapon had minor changes between Splatoon 1 and Splatoon 2. This one is really important because weapons like Luna Blaster, Mini Splatling, and Range Blaster all got nerfed because of their dominance in Splatoon 1. In a way, this allowed other weapons, like Tri, to take a stab at being meta. In fact, it only received a nerf to its movement speed, which was pretty minimal. All its other stats, its fire rate, its range, its damage, all stayed the same. And the most important of them all, Tri-Slosher got Burst Bomb and Ink Armor. Looking back, it's incredibly insane to me why the devs would give Tri-Slosher a Burst Bomb after seeing what Slosher with Burst Bomb was capable of in Splatoon 1, but Burst Bomb basically did everything that the Tri needed from a sub. It improved its mobility, it gave it a tool to combo with, and it only cost 40% of your ink tank. As for its special, while not invincible like Bubbler, Ink Armor introduced a variety of new problems to this franchise. When activated, Ink Armor covers you and your teammates regardless of distance with a breakable armor that protects you from any damage. Basically, they introduced a special that had global range that gave you additional HP. This was vastly different from Bubbler because even though Bubbler was invincible, for your teammate to get Bubbler, they had to be really close to you. In this case, you could be as far away from your teammate as long as you were on the stage and alive. You could press the Ink Armor and it'll give it to your teammate. Base game Ink Armor also had other issues like the speed at which you would be invulnerable after the Ink Armor was broken, and the damage calculations on the armor. So in a nutshell, we gave Tri-Slosher an easier sub to use, a broken special that made old popular weapons irrelevant, and more importantly, it retained almost all of its weapon attributes, making it the perfect weapon to punish the short-range weapons which became popular at the beginning of Splatoon 2. This is where the immense hatred for this weapon started. This is where Tri-Slosher gained the reputation of being a skillless weapon, and it broke competitive Splatoon as well. The most powerful comp during the first initial months of Splatoon 2 was triple Tri-Slosher with a Rapid Blaster. The reason Rapid was present was because of its ability to combo with the Tri, but it was also a really good counter because it had a kit that could chip away from the Ink Armor from a safe distance. It got so bad with this meta that in version 1.12, the devs decided to drop a hammer on Tri by increasing its points for special from 180p to 210p. To put it in context, in Splatoon 3, it took the devs 3 updates to increase Tri-Slosher Nouveau from 180 to 210p, and all Splatoon 2 needed was one update. Nintendo was not fooling around with this meta. But that wasn't enough to detract people from using Tri-Slosher. Triple Tri did start to decrease a bit, but you still likely see a Tri-Slosher in a team composition. So in the next update, Nintendo was like, yeah, we can't do this anymore. We're nerfing its range and we're nerfing its damage. And we're also nerfing Ink Armor, and we'll throw in Rapid Blaster to get a nerf as well, just to completely kill this meta. Eventually the devs felt like they went overboard with Tri-Slosher and started buffing the weapon again, most notably giving it back its original damage and dropping it to 180p. As it became stronger again, its reputation as a brain-dead weapon unfortunately stayed, but it did not really see a dominant re-entry into competitive. The weapon was basically relegated to being a very niche pick, where Tri-Slosher was incredibly good like Mako Mart or Manta Maria, or where your team composition was able to manage having 2 ink armors. Fast forward to Splatoon 3, not even a cosmetic change could help Tri-Slosher's reputation. But the hate was slightly taken away, at least, from another Slosher weapon, the sloshing machine, which now began to get the insults of being easy and brain dead. It's so funny to me how players only have issues with the main weapon, especially non-shooters, when it has a good kit, even though the main weapon has little to no changes between games. But I digress, that could be a topic for a different day. But going back to the Tri, the vanilla kit did not see a lot of widespread success among players, but it did see some notable use with a team called Please Forfeit that ran a Tri-Slosher and went on to win multiple weekly tournaments. The hate for the weapon saw a slight increase with the Tri-Slosher Nouveau, given its dominance in Turf War, which resulted in a couple of back-to-back nerfs. I was also at the forefront hearing the skillless comments again because I was one of the few players at the time who was pushing Tri-Slosher Nouveau in weekly tournaments. While it's nowhere near the hatred it received during the initial days of Splatoon 2, people still like to hate on this weapon for being one of the easiest weapons in the franchise. And it's mainly because of the shenanigans it caused in 2017.